Recap, Tales of Herding Gods, Chapter 423, Chapter Translator, Nine Tails Editor, Dark Gem. The technique known as Sword World had been forged by Eternal Peace, Imperial Preceptor, only after he stepped across the threshold of the sword path under the guidance of Village Chief. It was utterly unlike the sword arts he had wielded in earlier days, for in the past he had merely stood before the gate of the sword path. He had glimpsed it, but had not yet walked within. Even though his sword techniques had once been unrivaled, and the world had praised him as the sword god who created the three foundational sword forms, without truly entering the sword path, he could never stand shoulder to shoulder with Village Chief. Yet the moment he stepped into that path, his strength in battle rose like a dragon soaring through the heavens. His natural talent was without equal, and none of his abilities carried the slightest flaw. Yet the sword path he comprehended was not the same as the path walked by the man he admired. Village Chief honored the fallen heroes and established sword picture, preserving memories of those who had walked the road before. The Imperial Preceptor, however, opened new horizons with fearless resolve, pressing forward with sweeping reform, his heart vast and his vision boundless. It was precisely that spirit that determined his destiny. The generation of Village Chief had already passed into history, while his own era had only just begun. His sword world had only just been created, and only its first chapter had taken shape. That chapter was called Boundary. With a single sword, it defined the borders of mountains and rivers, safeguarded the empire, calmed the chaos across the 4 seas, swept away calamities across the 6 directions and 8 wildernesses, and ushered in an age of peace beneath heaven. The will and ambition of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor were concealed within that blade, forming the most supreme sword technique he could create at that very moment. When the tip of his sword pierced the eye of the one-eyed god, the true essence of Boundary had already been hidden deep within the opponent's skull. The one-eyed god had been plotting carefully, for he did not truly possess only a single eye. In truth, he had 2. Through his peculiar techniques and profound mastery over the path of creation, he had shifted one eye to the center of his brows, while hiding the other behind his head. That second eye remained concealed beneath his hair, deceiving all observers into believing he had only one eye. Thus, no one realized that he could see both the world before him and the world behind him at the same time. He understood well that Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was a terrifying adversary, and more importantly, the central architect of Eternal Peace Empire's sweeping reforms. Therefore, even if it required sacrificing one eye, he had resolved to end the man's life. Yet even though the one-eyed god was a cunning old fox willing to trade an eye for victory, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had already surpassed him in the battlefield of wits. The moment Boundary, concealed within the wound, erupted, cracks burst open across the one-eyed god's head. From those fractures spilled forth streams of pure snow-white swordlight. His eyes, ears, nose, and mouth suddenly turned as pale as frost, and dazzling sword radiance burst forth from each of his facial orifices. Cracks spread across his skull in every direction, and from each one poured blazing sword beams. In the blink of an eye, the brilliant white rays illuminated the snowy mountains like the arrival of midday beneath the blazing sun. Thump! The fist of the one-eyed god slammed violently into Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body, and the earth beneath them split apart at once. Vast cracks raced across the land in every direction, stretching so far that their ends could not be seen. Eternal Peace. Imperial Preceptor coughed out blood as the crisp sound of bones breaking echoed through his body. Everything above the neck of the one-eyed god had already vanished completely. His headless corpse swayed weakly for a moment before collapsing heavily onto the ground. Deep within the pit below, Eternal Peace, Imperial Preceptor lay unable to move. With his last breath hanging faintly within him, he whispered hoarsely, "Jade-Face Poison King, save me." At that same moment, Cripple was racing like a whirlwind with Apothecary strapped across his back, fleeing desperately from the raging battlefield. Apothecary continued refining medicine without pause, his speed far surpassing that of Chinmu. Poison was flung toward the gods of high heavens, while medicinal pellets were tossed toward Village Chief and their companions. "Cripple! Faster! Faster! Go faster!" Apothecary shouted. Didn't you boast that your speed ranks first beneath heaven? If I weren't carrying you, I would already be first in the world. Cripple barked angrily, his voice filled with frustration. If you're so capable, why don't you try having your legs chopped off and reattached? Mine were cut off twice. Twice! They were only just reattached again. If I run any faster, they'll probably leave my upper body behind and run away on their own. It's fine, Apothecary replied calmly. Moore's craftsmanship is excellent. They won't break so easily. Run faster. The god behind us is about to catch up. Behind them, a three-headed god charged forward like a raging storm. Apothecary had long since released the little babies he had carefully raised. Swarms of venomous creatures surged toward the god like a living flood. These venomous beasts had been nourished for years with spirit pills, rare medicines, and every poison imaginable. Their strength was formidable. As they ran, their bodies transformed. Muscles swelled, bones expanded, and their forms grew grotesque and enormous until they became monstrous beasts capable of swallowing clouds and spewing fog, flame, water, and poison. Yet even so, they could do little more than slow the advance of the three-headed god. The creature was unimaginably terrifying. With every strike, it smashed the venomous beasts into fragments, their bodies bursting into splashes of multicolored insect pulp that scattered through the air. Many were blasted away by his roar before they could even reach him. Even when poisoned, one of his three heads would suddenly ignite with blazing fire. Flames surged throughout his body, burning him from within as divine fire tempered his flesh again and again, destroying the venom that had seeped into him. Meanwhile, another head turned deep sapphire blue. Radiant blue light swept across his body repeatedly, cleansing it and expelling every trace of toxin instantly. For perhaps the first time, Apothecary's poison had encountered its perfect nemesis. Furthermore, without his venomous creatures, Apothecary himself was considered the weakest among the villagers. His cultivation stood merely at the celestial being realm, for nearly all of his time had been devoted to raising poisons and nurturing venomous beasts. Yet, if those poisons and creatures were taken into account, his battle strength defied all measurement. He could poison a god to death, but a single slap could also end his life. With a burden on his back, Cripple's speed was no longer at its peak. Worse still, he had to constantly avoid the possible ambushes of other gods lurking nearby, making their escape even more perilous. Even with Cripple's unmatched swiftness, weaving through the devastating divine arts erupting across the battlefield was incredibly dangerous. One moment of carelessness would cost them both their lives. The Imperial Preceptor has already lost the ability to fight, Apothecary shouted. We must save him first. Cripple dashed toward the place where Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had fallen. But just then, the three-headed god suddenly shook his body violently. Two of its heads tore free and soared through the air, sweeping toward them with torrents of fire and water. Cripple hurriedly dodged the assault, yet the land before him suddenly became unbearably hot. In an instant, it transformed into a sea of boiling lava. The entire snow mountain began to sink downward, while a god stood upon its peak, holding a crystal-clear mirror. The mirror rose into the sky and hung suspended above the lava, its broad surface shining downward. The underground world suddenly became as transparent as a clear lake where nothing could hide. That god possessed the head of a goat, crowned with a pair of curved horns. His gaze was sharp and piercing as he searched the depths beneath the ground. Suddenly, the mirror's light illuminated Tuxing Feng. He was racing beneath the earth, but the moment the light touched him, his body slowed drastically. Though he could normally travel freely underground, the mirror's radiance bound him in place, restricting his speed. Die! The goat-headed god sneered coldly. The horns upon his head detached themselves and plunged into the lava, shooting directly toward Tuxing Feng. At that very instant, the molten lava suddenly surged upward, forming a gigantic face. Its mouth opened wide and swallowed the goat-headed god whole. Even if I die, I'll drag you down with me. Cripple and Apothecary looked beneath the earth and saw Tuxing Feng trapped by the mirror's beam. The twin horns had pierced straight through his body from front and back. With a desperate divine art, Tuxing Feng dragged the goat-headed god downward into the depths of the earth. Cripple, steal that mirror! Apothecary shouted urgently. Cripple rushed forward and unleashed heaven-pilfering sun-switching hands. In an instant, the clear mirror vanished without a trace, stolen away by his nimble fingers. Freed from the mirror's restraint, Tuxing Feng immediately attacked the goat-headed god with all his strength. Yet without the mirror's light, Cripple and Apothecary could no longer see what was happening beneath the earth. The lava roared and bubbled violently, sending waves of scorching heat into the air. Suddenly it surged upward and formed a massive palm that quickly solidified. Soon after, fists, hammers, and legs burst forth from the molten sea, all frozen in the sky as though the earth itself had been shaken to its very core. Cripple hid behind Apothecary to avoid the shock waves while shouting into the ground, 3-inch nail! Stop fighting and come out quickly. Let Apothecary treat your wounds. Apothecary gently patted his shoulder and spoke softly, There's no need to call him out. Let him fight to his heart's content. When he was immobilized earlier, those goat horns nailed his primordial spirit in place. He's already breathing his last breath. Once that final breath is gone, he will. He did not finish his sentence. Cripple froze briefly, then clenched his teeth and sprinted toward eternal peace. Imperial Preceptor without looking back. The sea of lava continued trembling violently. Strange rocks erupted endlessly from the earth, forming countless bizarre shapes. The desperate battle raging beneath the ground had reached a level that no mortal eye could imagine. Then suddenly everything fell silent. Only the grotesque stone shapes and frozen forms of palms and fists remained. Whoosh! The lava split apart, and the goat-headed god slowly walked out. His body rose higher and higher with each step. Thump, thump, thump. He emerged from the sea of lava while molten rock flowed down his body, hardening into pitch-black stone when it touched the ground. His eyes were blank, his appearance wretched, yet his body still radiated astonishing fighting spirit. Cripple and Apothecary were stunned. Yet at that moment, the goat-headed god suddenly collapsed. A sharp horned hammer was lodged deep in the back of his skull. Tuxing Feng's short figure fell forward while clutching his hammer tightly. The 2 goat horns remained embedded in his body. The scarlet flames burning within the eyes of the chief of the earth travelers slowly began to fade. The taste of flaming fruit from the depths of the earth? It's just like strong wine, he murmured softly. When it flows down your throat, it makes you relive your whole life again. The fire in his eyes dimmed further as he continued. I feel that taste again. So I suppose my life is ending. I should never have answered the call of the human emperor's seal. But our ancestor made a vow, and the earth travelers will never break the oath of our forefather. His eyes slowly closed as his body sank together with the goat-headed god into the sea of lava. The molten fire swallowed them both. Cripple carried Apothecary to the side of Eternal Peace, Imperial Preceptor. Apothecary immediately began emergency treatment when an incomparably brilliant light burst forth from the darkness. They lifted their heads. The sunship was sailing toward them through the heavens. Upon its deck stood a figure like a heavenly goddess, her hands gripping chains that guided a blazing sun behind her. It's the girl Muir brought with him, Apothecary exclaimed in shock. She's the Sun Guardian. He immediately shouted upward, Sun Guardian, come help us quickly. Yan Jingjing looked down, her arms pulled on the chains. High in the sky, the sun itself trembled under the terrifying force and began descending from the heavens. On the sunship, the expressions of tens of thousands of sun herders changed drastically. All of them shouted in unison, Sun Guardian, no. Little ancestor, you mustn't imitate his highness, the sun herd chief cried out. The descending sun halted halfway in the sky, frozen in place. And from beneath it, countless beams of incomparably sharp golden light erupted downward, striking directly toward the gods of high heavens. Translator, Editor, Dark Gem. Across the vast wilderness, the battlefield sprawled for several hundred miles like a torn scroll of war. The clash of powers was divided into many fronts, yet every front was bound along the jagged spine of the god-broken mountain range. The 5 immortals of the demon race, King Kun, Queen Yai, Blind, Old Ma, Butcher, Mute, Deaf, together with Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, Village Chief, Granny C, Old Dao Master, Old Roulette, and Hermit Ching. You were all locked in their own fierce duels, Each of them stood as the mightiest champion of their respective races, and under ordinary circumstances, it was rare for such figures to encounter a worthy opponent. Yet before the gods of high heavens, even they were still a step beneath eternal peace. Imperial Preceptor and Tuxing Feng had already proven themselves to be supreme practitioners. The Imperial Preceptor had fought with every drop of strength in his body merely to slay the one-eyed god. Yet even in victory, he had suffered grievous wounds, while Tuxing Feng's struggle had ended in mutual destruction. From this alone, the gulf between them and the gods could be clearly seen. The strength of the five immortals and Granny C was slightly inferior still, yet each of them possessed countless strange techniques and crafty methods. They moved constantly across the battlefield, weaving divine arts while wandering between blows. Even so, their enemies were overwhelmingly powerful, and the strain of battle gradually wore them down. Yan Jingjing arrived at precisely the right moment. As the blazing sun carried by Sunship descended, Yellow Immortal swiftly untied the sack slung across his back. From within it erupted thick yellow smoke, whose stench was so foul that it seemed to slice into the liver and guts of his opponent. The god retched violently, vomiting without restraint. Yellow Immortal surged forward, preparing to devour the enemy's souls and spirits. Yet before he could complete the act, his opponent struck back and slammed him down. Elsewhere, Willow Immortal revealed her true form. Her body transformed into an enormous green serpent, vast as a dragon coiling atop a snow-capped mountain peak. In response, her opponent cast aside his disguise as well. His true body rose like a towering mountain, his white fur gleaming beneath the dim sky, his eyes blazing like sparks within darkness. The clash that followed left Willow Immortal coughing blood, crimson streams pouring from her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose without end. White Immortal, Rat Immortal, and Fox Immortal had also been gravely injured. Among them, only Granny C managed to continue holding her ground. With the teleportation flag fluttering and the great overarching heavenly star palm force erupting from her palms, she evaded the relentless attacks of her opponent. Under normal circumstances, the five immortals would join forces to battle a single enemy together. But now their numbers were insufficient. Each group had to hold back two gods of high heavens at once, exhausting themselves in the struggle. Even with Granny C aiding them, the burden was only slightly eased. Still, they lacked the strength to truly contest two gods at the same time. On another front of the battlefield, old Dao Master's Dao sword had already advanced to the 14th writing. Though he had only cultivated half a move of that 14th writing, he wielded it to resist his enemies. Sword light surged forth like a heavenly script carved across the sky, splitting mountains and cracking the earth itself. Yet before long, his opponent discerned the flaw within the technique. A streak of divine radiance pierced through layers upon layers of sword light and nailed old Dao Master directly against the cliffside. Dao sword is only so-so. The god's enormous palm descended toward the cliff like a falling mountain, smashing toward Dao Master where he hung pinned. Not far away, old Rulai unleashed the full might of the 20 heavens within his Rulai's Mahayana Sutra. His body swelled until he resembled a colossal Buddha statue. 10,000 Buddhas appeared around him, and he clashed with his opponent through sheer brute force. Yet even so, he gradually fell into disadvantage, his 20 heavens crumbling one after another. The three-headed, six-armed god battling him stood nearby, exchanging fist for fist in relentless combat. Before long, old Rulai's body was splattered with blood. His white eyebrows dyed crimson. He was already old. The vigor of his chi and blood had faded with the years, and his constitution was no longer what it once had been. In earlier times, the power of Rulai's Mahayana Sutra would have allowed him to continue fighting endlessly without fatigue. His surging chi and blood could elevate the might of his divine arts by leaps and bounds. But now his strength had waned, and he was gradually suppressed beneath the attacks of his enemy. From not far away, Old Ma had attempted several times to rush forward and rescue him, yet each time his own opponent blocked his path, preventing him from offering aid. His situation mirrored old Rulai's closely, for he too had cultivated Rulai's Mahayana Sutra to its final realm, the Brahma realm. Around him, gods and Buddhas manifested in 20 layers of sacred images. Old Ma's advantage lay in his youth. His body remained strong and sturdy, whereas old Rulai's chi and blood had withered, leaving him unable to endure prolonged battle. Shariputra, form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. The chant of scripture flowed from old Rulai's mouth, and suddenly his chi and blood surged with new vitality. The power of his attacks grew ever more terrifying, surpassing even those of his opponent. Old Ma's heart trembled violently, and he cried out, "Master!" Old Rulai turned his head to look at him and smiled gently. "Buddhism is left to you. Pass it down for me." The same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. Brilliant Buddha light burst forth, swallowing old Rulai and the god who fought him. Unlike them, blind soared across the sky between every battlefield. His divine mind eyes pierced through weaknesses in the enemy's defenses, allowing him to launch sudden sneak attacks. Even so, he could only force the gods to defend themselves, and thus preserve the lives of his companions. He was unable to land any truly decisive blow. Butcher and his opponent, Star Sovereign Yan, had both fallen into a frenzy of battle. The two men fought with utter madness. Once their blades were drawn, the world beyond them ceased to exist. One man, one knife. No matter how grievous their injuries became, no matter how terrifying the enemy's assault, they simply raised their blades and slashed forward again and again. The great furnace upon Mute's back roared as divine flames poured forth. From the furnace set within his chest, streams of silver pellets flowed outward endlessly, transforming and reshaping themselves into countless divine weapons. It seemed as though a boundless furnace burned within his dantian. With the twin furnaces blazing in unison, his strength became peerless. Death wielded his brush dipped in ink, and with every stroke, heaven and earth were dyed in his painting. Snow-covered mountains and vast plains appeared beneath his brush, merging illusion with reality. Mountains and rivers within his paintings overlapped with the actual landscape, forming a strange yet elegant realm. He guided his opponent wandering through the border between painting and reality, yet never engaged him directly in battle. For he knew that in a frontal clash, he was not the god's equal. At that moment, his brush swept across the sky and painted 100 miles of mountains and rivers. Within the painting, there was another painting. Within the world, there existed another world. His enemy became lost within the layered illusions, unable to determine direction or escape. Death leapt out from the painting back into the real world, intending to destroy the painted mountains and rivers together with the illusionary world. But suddenly, a streak of sword light burst from the painting and pierced straight through his chest. Death was blasted backward through the air. With all his strength, he swung his brush once more. That single powerful stroke caused every mountain within 100 miles to collapse inward one after another, imploding with terrifying force before exploding outward with devastating energy. A mere mortal shouldn't possess the power of gods and devils. An enraged roar erupted from within the crumbling painted world, and from the violent explosion, a blood-soaked palm stretched outward, grasping toward Death, who was still flying backward. Meanwhile, Queen Yi and King Kun had both revealed their true forms. They moved through sea and sky like two indomitable beast gods, their roars shaking the heavens. Enormous beasts and divine figures clashed against one another, tearing heaven apart and rending the earth. Dark clouds concealed the moon overhead. Yet again and again they were torn open by the fury of battle, allowing pale moonlight to spill down. King Kun and Queen Yi were both covered in wounds, yet their fighting spirit burned brighter than ever. Queen Yi transformed into a massive bird whose wings beat against the ocean winds as she soared above the sea. Wherever she passed, the waters churned violently. Whenever she spun through the air, her blade flashed forth, slicing through the heavens as she struck toward the god-suppressing King Kun. Her blade tore open the sky itself. Yet what fell from that rift was not moonlight. Instead, a blazing sun dropped from the slit she had carved open. Queen Yi was stunned, unable to comprehend what had happened. Yet her blade had already been unleashed, and it could not be withdrawn midway. Gathering all her strength, she continued her strike toward the god suppressing King Kun. At that moment, the dark clouds parted once again, revealing another god whose face twisted with malice. His hand rose toward Queen Yi. his 5 fingers spreading wide like towering mountains as they descended upon her. The god hidden within the clouds suddenly noticed the falling sun and froze in confusion. What kind of divine art is this? At that instant, the blazing sun erupted with light. From beneath it, countless rays of razor-sharp golden brilliance rained down upon him. Nor was he the only target. The other gods of high heavens were struck as well. The golden rays were incomparably sharp, piercing cleanly through the bodies of the gods. Yan Jingjing did not wield violence the way Qin Mu did. Qin Mu had once lifted the sun carried by Sunship and smashed it directly into his enemies with overwhelming destructive force, a reckless method that could easily damage the sun itself. He had done so largely because he lacked the knowledge to control it or properly unleash its power. But as the guardian of the sun, Yan Jingjing had guided Sunship through countless battles within the darkness. She understood completely how to wield both Sunship and the sun itself. Under her control, they could be used freely and with perfect precision. In her hands, Sunship unleashed the greatest power possible while causing the least damage to the sun. In that moment, the region surrounding the God-broken mountain range for thousands of miles was illuminated. Within the sea below, King Kun thrust his golden horn upward, piercing through the lower body of the god who had been stepping upon him, and nailing the enemy directly to the surface of the ocean. The god had no chance to evade the attack and was shattered beneath the blazing sunlight. The hand, reaching toward death, broke apart beneath the sun's brilliance, and the enormous palm, about to crush old Tao Master, was pierced through by golden rays. Under the sunlight, the god's face was fully revealed. The Buddha light that had filled the battlefield was intense, yet even it was driven away by the blazing sunlight, revealing 2 figures standing upright within it. Old Rulai had dragged the god down together with him. The sunlight continued spreading outward, bathing the towering snowy mountains in its glow. The mountain where Willow Immortal had fought was dyed crimson. The gigantic serpent that resembled a green dragon tumbled from its peak, while Yellow Immortal's sack had been pierced through with countless holes. Its owner lay crushed into pulp beneath the god's foot, and that same god now bristled with the silver needles of White Immortal like an enormous porcupine. The sunlight stretched even farther across the battlefield. Butcher and Star Sovereign Yan hung illuminated in midair, while Hermit Qing Yu and Flower Sovereign fell from the heavens, their bodies extended as they plummeted. The golden rays extended farther still, revealing the 9th move of Sword Picture, blazing in the distance. Within its overwhelming brilliance, Star Sovereign Chao and another god were completely submerged. Beneath Sunship, the 2 heads of the 3-headed god had just gravely wounded Cripple and Apothecary. Both of them were blasted high into the sky. At that moment, a heavenly silkworm burst forth from Apothecary's body, frantically spinning silk to wrap Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and prevent him from dying from his grievous wounds. Boom Sunship trembled violently as the 3-headed god recalled his 2 detached heads and landed upon the ancient vessel. He charged directly toward Yan Jingjing, who stood within the circle of 4 divine pillars. The faces of Sunherd Chief and the others changed drastically as they rushed forward to stop him. Countless Sunherders were blasted apart into fragments. Yet even their sacrifice failed to slow him down. The arrival of Sunship had already transformed the course of the battlefield. If Yan Jingjing continued unleashing its power, the gods of high heavens might very well suffer complete defeat. Yan Jingjing controlled the ancient divine weapon Sunship, whose terrifying power threatened every opponent. Yet because she had to remain within the formation to control it, her movements were restricted, placing her in grave danger. Should anyone close the distance to her, the situation would become extremely unfavorable. When Sunship first appeared, the 3-headed god had been pursuing Cripple and Apothecary in the surrounding region. He had been the closest to the ship, yet no one had expected him to abandon his target so abruptly and leap straight aboard. Sunherder Chief raised his sunbell and rang it with all his strength, yet even that divine sound struggled to halt the god's assault. By then, the enemy had already reached the pillars of the formation. 2 severed heads flew out once more, passing directly by Sunherder Chief and striking toward their true target. One head spewed forth a torrent of water, while the other unleashed blazing flames toward Yan Jingjing. Yan Jingjing spat out a mouthful of blood as she raised her hand to defend. Instantly, the power of the sun diminished. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the battlefield, the full power of the ninth move of Sword Picture erupted. Blinding sword light illuminated the entire world, overshadowing even the brilliance of the sun. Yet before long, that light faded. At the place where it had been unleashed, Star Sovereign stood upright, staring coldly across the battlefield toward his ancient rival, the human emperor. "You're old." Star Sovereign Chao gazed at him with disdain. A crack spread across the center of his brow. "If you were at your peak, I would certainly have died beneath that move. But now your chi and blood are nearly exhausted. This strike could not take my life. It's just..." His body swayed as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled softly. "You still destroyed my life force, but I'm not bad either. At the very least, I can drag you down with me." Beside him, the god who had fought together with him against the old sword god suddenly split apart into countless fragments. His body broke into chunks of flesh that tumbled silently to the ground.